Mystery Phantom.
I never thought I'd end up back in Black Hollow. The roads leading into the village were narrow, lined with skeletal trees whose branches clawed at the sky like desperate hands. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something older, something that didn't belong. As I drove my rusty truck down the main street, I noticed the houses, mostly clapboard and sagging, staring back at me with dark, hollow windows. It was late afternoon, but the shadows seemed to move unnaturally, as though they were alive. I remembered visiting here as a boy, but the memory felt like a dream I could barely recall, with sharp edges that pricked at the corners of my mind. A faint whisper brushed against my ear. I spun around in my seat, but the cab was empty. My pulse quickened. It sounded like a voice, or several voices, low and rhythmic, almost chanting. I told myself it was the wind, though the sound seemed too deliberate, too human. I pulled up in front of the old church at the village center, its steeple leaning precariously. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind, revealing a darkness inside that seemed to swallow the last rays of sunlight. A chill ran down my spine. I remembered the stories, the disappearances, the strange lights, the townsfolk who never seemed to leave. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against the gravel, and immediately felt eyes on me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing but the empty street, silent except for the rustling leaves. Yet I knew I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath and walked toward the church. My hands shook as I pushed the door open fully. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and decay. Wooden pews sat in neat rows, though many were splintered or overturned. At the altar, faint inscriptions were carved into the wood, symbols I couldn't recognize. And then I heard it again, the whispering. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, wrapping around me, tugging at my thoughts. My mind reeled as I tried to focus, trying to convince myself this was all imagination. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door behind me. The whispering stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. And then I realized the sound of footsteps was coming from the balcony above. Footsteps that did not belong to me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to remember. But it was too late. The village had called me back. I didn't sleep that night. I tried, truly, but the bed in the small room above the general store offered no comfort. Only the creak of floorboards and the groan of the old building as if it were alive. Every sound seemed magnified, a scurrying rat, the snap of a branch outside, the faint drip of water somewhere deep in the walls. My mind refused to quiet. When I finally forced my eyes open, the room was bathed in a pale gray light. I could see the outlines of the furniture, warped by age and dust. But there was something else, something subtle yet unmistakable. Shadows stretched across the floor, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. They twisted when I blinked, flickered in ways no light should allow. I got dressed slowly, my hands trembling, and stepped outside. The village looked different in daylight, not brighter, but quieter. Too quiet. There were no birds, no wind, no ordinary signs of life, only the houses looming like silent sentinels, and the church spire still leaning, still foreboding. As I walked toward the outskirts of the village beyond the road, I noticed something unsettling in the fields beyond the road. A faint haze hung low over the tall grass, as though the earth itself was breathing. And then I saw 'em, shapes moving slowly, almost floating just above the ground. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the shapes vanished the moment I focused. Only long shadows remained, stretching unnaturally, as if the sunlight itself feared to touch them. I returned to the main street, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Every doorway, every window seemed to watch me, and the faint whispering from the night before returned, this time louder, more insistent. The voices were not human, not completely. They carried a rhythm, a cadence, like a song I should know but couldn't remember. I passed by the old blacksmith shop, now boarded up, and felt a sudden sharp tug in my chest. My vision blurred. I stumbled, almost falling into the dirt road, and caught myself against the doorframe. The whispering was now inside my head. Names, dozens of names, murmured over and over, growing louder and more urgent. I tried to run, but the village seemed to shift around me. Streets I had walked yesterday now twisted into impossible angles. I recognized no building, no alley, yet everything felt familiar, like a distorted memory I couldn't escape. I realized then that Black Hollow was alive, and it had been waiting for me. By midday, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest beyond the village. Trees stretched high and thick, their trunks blackened as if charred by some ancient fire. The air smelled of rot and smoke, though there was no fire. And in the shadows between the trees, I could see the shapes again, darker now, moving deliberately, circling me. I called out, my voice cracking, "Who's there?" The wind answered with a chorus of whispers, and then, unmistakably, a single word: "Stay." I turned to run back toward the village, but the road had disappeared. I was alone. I didn't know how long I wandered in the forest. Time seemed meaningless here. Minutes stretched into hours, and shadows warped around me. The trees were like giant blackened sentinels, their branches reaching for me, brushing against my skin like fingers. The whispering never ceased. It had grown louder, more insistent, almost angry now, as though the forest itself resented my intrusion. I stumbled over roots that twisted unnaturally, like the veins of some monstrous creature beneath the soil. Then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, pale and sickly, like moonlight filtered through smoke. I moved toward it cautiously, my boots sinking into damp earth. The whispers grew into voices, calling my name, mocking me, warning me, begging me, all at once. The source of the glow was a clearing I didn't remember from the maps or from any stories. In the center stood a stone well, old and crumbling, its mouth black as a void. Strange carvings adorned its rim, spirals, jagged lines, symbols I couldn't recognize. The glow seemed to emanate from inside. As I peered over the edge, I thought I saw something moving deep within the darkness, something alive. It whispered to me. The voice was closer than ever, soft but commanding. "Come closer, see what you have forgotten." I stumbled backward, heart racing, but my legs felt heavy, as if the earth itself had become viscous. The forest around me darkened further, shadows pooling at the base of every tree. The shapes I had seen before, the dark drifting figures, were here now, circling me just beyond the trees. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Then, suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid but impossibly thin, with long, spindly limbs and a face obscured by shadows. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, glowed faintly like embers. It raised a hand toward me. And then I saw it, hundreds of symbols carved into its skin, writhing as though alive. It whispered in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I comprehended. It was a warning, a curse, a message. I ran. My boots thumped against the wet earth, branches tore at my clothes and hair, and still the forest seemed endless. Behind me, the shadows multiplied, their shapes flickering and stretching impossibly, closing in. The whispering had become a scream, 1,000 voices screaming in unison, yet all were calling my name. Finally, I burst through the edge of the forest, collapsing near the abandoned church I had visited the first day. My lungs burned, my heart felt ready to shatter, but the shadows lingered at the tree line, watching me. And then I realized leaving the forest hadn't ended anything. The village itself had changed, and now the whispers followed me wherever I went. That night, as I hid in the church, I found old journals tucked beneath the floorboards, notes from villagers long gone. The entries spoke of disappearances, of strange lights in the forest, of creatures that weren't human, and every page ended with the same warning. The Hollow remembers, the Hollow waits.
I barely slept that night. The journals I found beneath the church floorboards had opened something in my mind. A memory long buried, a fear long suppressed. I kept imagining those spindly figures in the forest, their glowing eyes burning into my soul. And worse, I began noticing something new in the village itself. Eyes. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Windows of abandoned houses, darkened doorways, tree hollows. Everywhere I looked, I saw faint glimmers, tiny pinpricks of light, like someone or something was staring. And the whispering had returned. Not just in the forest now, but inside my head, constant, insistent, demanding attention. I decided to explore the village further, walking down the cracked road toward the old mill at the far edge. The mill had been abandoned for decades, its wheel frozen in place, wood rotting and blackened. Yet, as I approached, I felt it, a presence. The air grew colder, the shadows longer, and I could swear the whispering was synchronized with my heartbeat. Inside the mill, the darkness was suffocating. I could barely see, only the faint outline of machinery warped by rust and time. And then I heard it, footsteps above me, slow, deliberate. I called out, my voice cracking, "Who's there?" No answer. A shadow detached itself from the wall. At first, it was just darkness pooling, but then it solidified, an impossible humanoid, tall, thin, limbs bending the wrong way. Its head tilted unnaturally, as if studying me. I froze. It spoke not with words, but with a whisper that I somehow understood. "Why have you come back?" I swallowed hard. I don't know," I stammered. I had to see. I had to remember." It laughed, not a human laugh, but something like wind rattling through dead trees. "Remembering comes at a cost," it said. Its eyes, or the hollow pits where eyes should have been, glowed brighter. "And you belong to the hollow now." I bolted. I don't know how I made it out. The shadows followed, not like shapes, but like water, spilling over every corner, creeping through every crack. And when I stumbled into the sunlight outside, the village felt alien, even more oppressive. Even the air seemed thick, heavy with judgment. That night, I couldn't hide in the church. Every corner seemed to breathe. Every shadow moved with intent. I remembered the old journals again. They mentioned a watcher, a guardian of the hollow, a presence that ensured the village kept its dark secrets. I realized then that the whispers were not warnings, they were invitations, pulling me into something inevitable. I couldn't resist. I knew I had to go back into the forest, back to the well, to face whatever waited there. And as I prepared, I saw something I hadn't before. In the windows of every house along the main street, tiny pinpricks of light, eyes watching me, silently judging. The hollow was awake, and it was hungry. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The whispers, constant and piercing, had grown so loud I thought they might tear my mind apart. Every word, every hiss, every murmur called me back into the forest, toward the well, toward the darkness that had haunted my dreams. I knew I had no choice. I had to face it. The road leading to the forest was empty, unnaturally so. The houses that had watched me from their windows the night before were gone, or at least they appeared gone, swallowed by mist and shadows. I stepped into the trees, boots sinking into damp earth, heart pounding like a hammer against my ribs. The forest welcomed me as if it had been waiting. The air grew colder with every step, thick with rot and smoke. Shadows stretched in impossible directions, and the shapes I had glimpsed before drifted just beyond the corner of my vision. The whispering was now unbearable, voices overlapping, speaking every language I had ever known, and some I had never heard. I arrived at the clearing with the well. It looked unchanged, ancient and silent, but I could feel it pulsing, as though the earth itself were alive. I approached cautiously, staring into its black mouth. The glow inside flickered like a dying flame. Then I saw it. Rising from the shadows, a mass of forms, humanoid but wrong in every conceivable way, limbs bending impossibly, faces faceless yet whispering in voices I could feel in my bones. They circled the well, chanting in a cadence that made the air vibrate. And above them, a figure, taller, darker, more alive than any shadow, watched me, the Watcher. It moved toward me, not walking but gliding, limbs stretched unnaturally. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice a chorus of all the villagers that had ever disappeared. "You belong to the Hollow." I stumbled back, tripping over roots. My mind screamed to flee, but the forest shifted, paths twisting impossibly, corners turning into walls. I was trapped. The well called to me, promising answers, promising memories I had buried long ago. I could feel the pull, strong as gravity, dragging me closer. Then I remembered something from the journals, an incantation, a plea, a name I had once whispered as a boy. "Do not feed the Hollow. Do not give it your fear." I shouted, trying to force the fear from my body, trying to steady my shaking hands. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing, writhing in pain or anger, I couldn't tell. The Watcher paused, tilting its head. It spoke again. "You resist for now." I fell to my knees, gasping, sweat pouring from my body. The forest seemed to close in, yet something had shifted. The shadows retreated slightly, and the whispering softened to a low hum. But I knew this reprieve was temporary. I left the forest that night with more questions than answers. The Hollow was alive, and it remembered, it waited, and it had seen me resist. But for how long? As I stumbled back toward the village, I realized the truth I had feared all along. I could never leave Black Hollow. Not really. It was inside me now, and it would follow me until it had what it wanted, until it had me.
I woke the next morning with the taste of iron in my mouth and the echoes of whispering still thrumming in my head. The forest had changed overnight, or perhaps it had been me. The path I had taken yesterday seemed unfamiliar, twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist, and yet I remembered the way. I remembered because Black Hollow remembered. I returned to the village, to the derelict church, the only sanctuary I could find. The journals were still there, their pages brittle, but something had changed. Symbols I hadn't noticed before writhed across the margins, faintly glowing as if alive. My eyes scanned them, trying to decipher their meaning. Something ancient, something predatory, had left messages for me. Determined to understand, I walked toward the oldest house in the village, the one that predated even the church. It had been empty for decades, yet as I approached, I felt the air thicken. The door was ajar, and inside the shadows moved with a life of their own. I found more journals, scribbled notes from villagers long gone. They spoke of rituals, of sacrifices to the Hollow, of children who vanished into the forest, never to return. Every page reeked of fear, of desperation, and of the impossible, a force older than memory, waiting beneath the soil, feeding on the village's secrets. Then I heard it. A soft tapping from upstairs, like fingernails against wood. My pulse spiked. I called out, but only the whispering answered. Step by step, I climbed the creaking stairs. At the top, a door stood slightly open, a dim light flickering within. Inside was a room preserved in time. A small crib, ancient and splintered, sat in the corner. On the floor, a circle of symbols drawn in ash and dirt, and in the center of the circle, a small, dark figure crouched, human in shape, yet impossibly thin. Its eyes reflected everything I feared, glowing faintly, unblinking. It spoke, not aloud, but in my mind. You cannot save them. You cannot save yourself. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but then a realization struck me. The hollow was tied to memory, to the village's sins, to my own forgotten past. I remembered flashes, things I had buried as a boy, disappearances, shadows moving in corners. The hollow had always been here, waiting, feeding, shaping the village and me into what it wanted. The whispering intensified, now voices layered over each other like 1,000 streams converging. I understood then, the hollow did not merely haunt the village, it controlled it. It shaped reality, twisted memory, and demanded obedience. I fled the house, stumbling into the street. The village itself seemed alive, windows like eyes, doors like mouths breathing. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and at the far end of the street I saw the forest, its edge black as coal, beckoning me again. I knew I would have to return. There was no escape, not from the hollow, not from Black Hollow itself. And as I ran through the village, I realized the horrifying truth. The hollow was patient. It did not need to chase me. It simply waited, and everything I had seen, everything I had feared, was only the beginning.
I couldn't stay in the village any longer. The windows watched me. The doors whispered, and every shadow seemed to pulse with life. My mind was fraying, pulled in all directions by the hollow's whispers. And yet, some part of me, the part I didn't recognize anymore, knew I had to return to the forest. I had to confront it, or lose myself completely. The path to the forest seemed different this time. The trees leaned closer, their blackened trunks stretching into the sky like towers of bone. Roots snagged my boots, branches clawed at my face. The whispering followed me, louder than ever, overlapping, insistent, demanding. I stumbled into the clearing with the well. It was waiting. The hollow had taken shapes. The humanoid forms I had glimpsed before now circled the well like predators. Their movements were unnatural, jerky yet fluid, limbs stretching, bending in ways that should have been impossible. And in their midst stood the Watcher, taller, darker, more alive than any shadow should be. It spoke without moving its lips, the sound echoing in my skull. You come willingly, that is rare, but fear is delicious. I raised my hands, shaking, trying to steady my mind. I'm not afraid, I said, though my voice betrayed me. The hollow laughed, or at least the forest echoed a sound like laughter, deep and hollow, vibrating through the ground beneath me. Then they attacked, not physically, but mentally. Visions slammed into me, flashes of children lost to the forest, villagers screaming in silence, shadows stretching across the town. My memories twisted, replaying moments I had long forgotten, blending them with nightmares I had never known. The hollow fed on my fear, shaping it, twisting it, using it as a weapon against me.
I fell to the ground, clutching my head, screaming into the cold night. The Watcher loomed over me, its glowing eyes boring into my soul. And then I understood this was what it wanted. Not my death, not my escape, but my surrender, my acknowledgement that I belonged to Black Hollow. But something inside me snapped. Some spark of defiance that had survived decades of fear surged forward. I forced myself to my feet. I shouted, "I am not yours!" The hollow recoiled, a ripple passing through the circle of shapes. The forest shook. The whispers became shrill, angry, dissonant. For a moment, I thought I could fight them, thought I could push back the darkness. I grabbed a branch, raised it like a weapon, and stepped toward the Watcher. And then I saw it. The heart of the hollow, the well, the black void inside it, pulsed with light, almost like a living thing. The whispers emanated from it, feeding the forms, anchoring the Watcher. If I could destroy it, if I could close it, perhaps I could end this nightmare. I ran to the well, the hollow lashing out at me, shadows whipping through the air like whips, limbs striking, shapes dissolving into mist and reforming. My mind screamed, my body trembled, but I reached the rim of the well. I stared into the void and whispered the incantation from the journals. Do not feed the hollow. Do not give it your fear. Leave it empty. Leave it cold. The shadows convulsed. The Watcher let out a sound that was not human, not living, but piercing, shattering the forest silence. And then silence. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The forest held its breath. The well's blackness receded. The shapes dissolved, and the Watcher was gone, or at least I could no longer see it. I fell to my knees, shaking, exhausted. I had survived, but I knew this wasn't the end. The hollow had not been destroyed. It had been placated for now, and I knew it would return in whispers, in shadows, in memory. It would always wait.
I returned to the village at first light, but it was not the same place I had left, or thought I knew. Black Hollow had changed in subtle, insidious ways. The streets seemed quieter, but the silence carried weight, almost a presence. The shadows lingered longer, and the eyes in the windows had shifted. They were watching me differently now, as if expecting something. I stumbled back to the church, seeking the journals, hoping for answers or guidance. My hands trembled as I opened them. The writings spoke of cycles. The hollow never rested, never left. It waited, and those who defied it always returned, transformed in ways invisible yet permanent. Some went mad, others disappeared, and a few became part of the village itself, shadows among the living. I tried to reassure myself that I had won a reprieve. I had faced it. I had spoken the incantation. I had resisted. But the whispering never ceased. It was quieter now, almost contemplative, but present. It seeped into the walls, the floors, the very air I breathed. And I realized with dawning horror my victory had been temporary. The hollow's memory was long, and its patience infinite. That afternoon, I walked the village streets cautiously. The abandoned houses seemed to lean toward me, their windows dark but alive. I passed the blacksmith's shop, the mill, the old schoolhouse. Everything seemed suspended in a tension between motion and stillness, as if the village itself were holding its breath. I noticed something new. Symbols etched into door frames, faint carvings in the wood that hadn't been there before, or perhaps I had never seen them. They glowed faintly when I approached, like living ink. My heart raced. The hollow was leaving reminders, messages. It was teaching me, marking me. In the center of the main street, I saw her, a girl, perhaps 10 or 12, standing perfectly still. Her eyes were too dark, reflecting the village like a mirror. I froze. She tilted her head unnaturally, a silent warning. Then she vanished, leaving only a faint echo of laughter that ran through the buildings like wind through a hollow pipe. By nightfall, I understood the truth. The hollow had not been defeated. It had tested me. It had allowed me a small measure of agency, to see my strength, to feel my courage. But it was patient. It would return, not with fury, but with inevitability. Its shadow would linger in every corner of the village, in every memory, in every breath. I sat in the church that night, staring at the flickering candlelight, trying to gather my thoughts. I realized that Black Hollow was not just a place. It was a consciousness, a predator that fed on memory, on fear, on silence. And I had entered its web. I had resisted, but it had learned me, catalogued me, marked me. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the hollow would not rest until it had completed its work, until it had me fully.
I knew it was coming. From the moment the sun sank behind the skeletal trees, I felt the hollow stir. Not as whispers, not as shadows, but as something alive, pressing against my chest, bending the air around me. The village had grown still again, but the stillness was no comfort. Every window, every cracked door frame, every warped sign along the road pulsed with a quiet, omniscient awareness. It knew I was ready. I returned to the forest one last time, drawn as though by invisible strings. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, the fog curling like fingers around my boots. I followed the path to the clearing, to the well. It had changed. The black void pulsed now with a rhythm I felt in my bones. Shapes moved around it, tall, thin, humanoid, faceless, but their movement was coordinated now, deliberate, like a single mind manifesting in pieces. And above them all, the Watcher, towering, spindly, impossibly ancient. Its eyes glowed with a light that was not reflection, but intent, as if it could see everything I feared and everything I hoped. I stepped forward, heart hammering. "I will not belong to you," I shouted. The hollow laughed, a sound that shook the clearing, reverberating through the trees and into my skull. It responded, not with words, but with visions. I saw the village, centuries ago, people kneeling in fear, whispering incantations to bind the hollow. I saw myself as a child, walking paths I had long forgotten, feeling the same tug I felt now. I saw every soul it had consumed, every shadow it had birthed, every memory it had twisted. And then I saw the truth. I had always been part of it. Even my defiance had been anticipated. The hollow spoke inside my mind. You cannot leave. You never left. The hollow remembers, and it will take what it is owed. I tried to run, but the forest had grown. Trees bent to block my path, roots tangled and snaked around me, shadows spiraling upward, forming walls. The whispering was everywhere, voices overlapping, screaming, pleading, commanding, laughing. My memories, my fears, my identity, they all bled together, merging with the forest, with the village, with the hollow itself. I realized then that I could not escape, not in body, not in mind. The Watcher approached, its limbs stretching impossibly, bending the air like liquid. I fell to my knees, but in the terror, a spark of clarity remained. If I surrendered fully, if I accepted the hollow, perhaps I could survive, not as myself, but as something else, a part of Black Hollow's memory, a shadow among shadows. I spoke aloud, trembling. I belong to you. The forest went still, the whispering paused, the Watcher hovered above the well, silent, observing, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, it bowed, or what I thought was a bow. Shadows from the shapes surrounding the well rose, merging with the mist, and the black void pulsed once more, deeper, fuller, alive with satisfaction. I opened my eyes, or perhaps I had never closed them, and looked around. The clearing was empty. The forest was still. The village lay beyond the trees, silent. But I knew I had changed. My body moved, but my mind belonged elsewhere. I felt the hollow in every step, in every breath, in every heartbeat. I was both observer and participant, part of its memory, part of its will. And as the first rays of dawn struck the village, I realized the terrible, eternal truth. Black Hollow remembers everything. The hollow never forgets. It waits. And now, so do I, forever.